G'day YouTube, it's Felix here with another ARTvsLIFE video. This is the second part in our practical drawing classes, which are designed to help you unblock your creativity, get through your writer's block, and get those creative juices flowing. Now, these classes aren't necessarily for professional artists. This can be done by anybody, particularly if you're the type of person who likes to sit there and doodle while they're on the phone. You've gone through a lot of pens just swirling around on the spot while you've been on the phone or in the office or in classrooms. This is a really good way to actually use some of that nervous energy, some of those little doodles, and actually generate some pretty decent art out of it. Now, if you haven't actually seen our first video that we did on the practical tips for unblocking your creativity, I'd highly recommend you go back and have a look at that first video, just because we'll be covering some of the same ground in the second video, and it's probably better to see the first and get a real good basis for what we're talking about here. These are really simple processes, as I said, really simple practices, but they can actually be quite profound if you use them in the right way. As the Zen guys say, some of the simplest things in life can often be most profound, so I would highly recommend you go back and have a look at that first video if you haven't already. Now, in the first classes we were doing swirls and filling them in with a checkerboard pattern, using active and passive areas to engage our brain in different ways. These classes move pretty quickly, so if you do have any problems with them or if I seem to be going too fast for you, please feel free to slow them down, go back, watch them again. These are fairly simple concepts, as I said, but sometimes it takes a little bit of practice to actually get them happening for you. Might sound like I'm repeating myself quite a bit with this one if you've already seen the first video. However, it is really important that you learn to bring in this 20 to 30 second time period, the wave motion of your brain, to actually open up your creativity and allow your brain to both get new ideas but also let go of old ideas. So, as we previously discussed, your brain has this pattern of ideas coming in and going out. It's about 5 to 6 seconds before your actual conscious mind is aware of it that the decision actually starts in your brain, and then it takes about 20 to 30 seconds for it to crash up against your consciousness and sweep out again. Okay, there's plenty of great videos out there on YouTube about the neuroscience actually behind this. You're welcome to look those up, or if you want to get in touch with me, I will point you towards some of those videos. It's really interesting how your brain pattern actually works. This idea that the electrical activity starts 5 to 6 seconds before you're actually conscious of it. Then this choice, this idea actually crashes up against your conscious mind and then sweeps out again in the period of about 20 to 30 seconds, about the length of 2 to 3 breaths in and out. Now, I'll use the example from the first video again of you being a beach, and that the ideas are actually like waves coming into that beach. They roll over, they strike you, and then they wash out again. It's a pretty easy example to use for this kind of idea of waves moving in and out. I hope you find it useful. However, I'll come up with some other examples in the future to assist you in understanding how your brain works and what you can actually do with it. Now again, what we're going to try and do is utilize some of this buzzing, some of this nervous energy that happens in your brain. Sometimes it's unwanted energy. What we're going to try and do is try and turn that unwanted energy into something actually productive. Like a famous blues writer actually said, instead of pouting, he turned that energy into blues, and that's why he ended up being such a good musician. Okay, quite often these ideas can be not just frustrating, but they can actually lead you to procrastination or to writer's block. What we want to try and do is try and find a way out of that writer's block and out of that nervous activity. So we're going to take this nervous, buzzing energy that surrounds our brains all the time and actually turn that into something. Use that very productively. It's a very simple technique, and I'm sure that you've already done this in your previous life. Okay, now, this first activity, what you want to do is just build up a group of swirls on a page. There's no right or wrong to be done here. Basically, you just want to end up with a topography of a mountain or an unusual abstract map. It's just a really good way of actually warming up your hand and connecting your hand and your brain together. There's no right or wrong. There's no correct way to do this. There's no outcome. What we're basically doing is just building up a group of swirls. Now, you'll notice that you tend to swirl in a particular direction, whether that's clockwise or anti-clockwise. What's important about that is that in between these swirls, you want to change direction. You want to actually go from one to the other, and in between, give yourself that 20 to 30 seconds to breathe. Actually take those 2 or 3 breaths in, and you'll find that it makes a lot of difference to how you actually apply your swirl to the page. This is not only a really great way of opening up your hand and opening up your mind and letting the two connect, but you can make this as simple and complicated as you want. It's also the basis for many of the mandala practices and Eastern practices, so there's a really simple way of producing some really complicated art if you would like to take it that far. However, this is just for fun, so what you want to do is just make some art that you enjoy. There's no right or wrong here, you just want to have some fun with this one, okay? If you would like to actually get a little bit tricky with this, there's a few other techniques that you can bring into it. One which I like to play with a little bit is actually turning the page around instead of turning your hand around. Sometimes you can find that as you move around through clockwise and anti-clockwise motions, just because of the way that your wrist actually works, you can get yourself clogged in certain areas. So another technique for unclogging those areas or getting your brain working is to actually turn the page around with your other hand, whether you're left or right hand, it doesn't make any difference. But this is a good way of bringing your whole body into your artistic practice and really opening up those channels in your brain and through your body that you wouldn't otherwise use. Now, as I said, you can make these as simple or as complicated as you would like. You can try different mediums, you can add in other swirls, you can build this up. There's lots of different techniques that you can use with this, lots of different mediums and processes you can use to really build up some beautiful and complicated artworks out of this very simple process. That's why I like to use it, because it is a really simple way of producing some really complicated art if you'd like to take it that far. So I guess I'll just show you some other examples of what you can do with this, just so you know that you can actually turn this swirl, this very basic process, into something really complicated. Now, so what you're going to need for this next section is a couple of bits of equipment. 2 or 3 pieces of A4 paper, or any paper will be good, a variety of pens, some scissors and some glue. Now if you're old enough to use glue and use scissors, then you can do this class. Parents, this is a great one to do with your kids, especially younger kids, if you can use the scissors with them. It's a really simple way of producing some really crazy fun art, okay? Now on your first blank piece of paper, what you want to do is just build up a group of swirls. Very similar to the first process that we're doing, just use a variety of pens and pencils to build up this interesting, complex series of swirls. Now again, using your breaths, wait in between doing the swirls, take those 2 or 3 breaths in and out, change directions, use different mediums, use different colors. There's no right or wrong to this process. Basically what you want to do is just build up an interesting mandala-like pattern, and using your breaths in and out, change directions and get your body and your hand really nicely connected. Okay, what you want to do is then take another piece of paper and do it again. It's a really simple process. This is something you can do while you're sitting around in your office job, or perhaps on the phone. If you're stuck on public transport, or you just happen to be bored in class, this is something that you can do just absent-mindedly, if you will, and just sit there and produce different colors, different patterns, different swirls, just something to keep your hand moving and to keep your brain invigorated. So taking your trusty pair of scissors, what you want to do is we're going to start cutting out those first pages. However, find yourself a nice third page or piece of cardboard or canvas that you can use as your background to paste things down onto, and then we can actually start cutting. What we're going to do is take those first 2 pages that we've done and fold them into quarters. You want the center of the drawing to be in the center of the page, and it's a really good idea to have the drawing on the outside of the fold so you can actually see what you're cutting into. Okay, now we're going to start cutting from the outside going in. You can use origami processes if you want to make these cuts a little bit more interesting, but basically what you want to do is end up with a set of rings that you've cut out outside going into inside. Okay, when you get to the middle, you can of course just throw away the centerpiece. You don't need that after we've done this process. So again, you just want to do that to the second piece of paper as well, remembering to fold it into quarters with the inside, the center of the mandala in the center of the fold, and then just start cutting out your circles. Just be a little bit careful when you're cutting out these circles that you want them to be complete circles. Now again, just throw away the centerpiece. You won't need it at the end of the day with this process. Okay, so now we get out our glue, and this is the part of the activity where you start to get active and passive areas. If you haven't seen our first video on passive and active, then I suggest you go back now and actually have a look at that passive and active discussion. So once you've got your glue stick, you can now start sticking these down again onto your blank piece of paper, onto your background. You can of course just stick these down again in a repeated mandala pattern if you just want to complicate a mandala process. However, You can use this for abstraction, and I think that's actually much better because it engages much more of your brain and will get much more of your creative juices flowing if you use it in an abstract way. Okay, now what you want to do is, instead of sticking down the entire ring, you just want to put a little bit of glue on the background. You want it to be flapping off the page a little bit. This is because you're actually going to end up layering these pieces of paper, and so you don't want to stick the whole thing down. You just really want to hold it on the page with a piece of glue and give yourself the ability to come back later and actually stick things down over the top of each other. This will make the process a little bit more complicated. However, it's a lot more fun and it engages a lot more of your brain if you do it this way. Remembering to breathe through this, okay? What you want to do in between actually sticking the rings down is take that 20 to 30 seconds to look at what you've got and then make some choices, okay? You can also do some pretty complicated things by sticking the rings down in different orders or breaking the ring and having it overlapping and interlocking. This is some of the mysterious part of art, and you can actually get some people saying, wow, how did you do that magic trick? You've just overlapped paper and I can't see any break. Well, you can put those little gaps and little breaks underneath other pieces of paper and just hide some of the things you're doing. Okay, this is a really simple process, but you can take this as far as you want. You can overlap it, you can make it as intense as you want, you can make it as simple as you want. Basically what you want to do is just use your eye and your brain and your breath just all in synchrony just to connect these things up. It's a really, really simple process, but you can actually generate some really interesting art out of it. And the best thing is, you're not always aware of what you're going to do. You might just start sticking down one corner and then get the happy accident of some really interesting things happening just because the end of the ring ends up somewhere else and you weren't quite sure what was going to happen. What you want to do in art is promote those happy accidents because that tends to be where the best art actually comes from. Now, of course, you can make this as simple or as complicated as you would like. You can use the areas that you've trimmed off the edges to stick back down. You can use the same mediums, you can draw back into it. You can actually make some pretty complicated art out of this process. However, if that felt a little bit primary school for you and you want to actually produce something a little bit more decent, then I'll take you through a process where you can actually use this in a painting. So what I've got here for this last example is just a piece of board. You can use canvas or cardboard, whatever you want as the background of your painting. And I'm just going to build up the swirl. Again, remembering to breathe in between the swirls, change directions, go from clockwise to anti-clockwise, use a variety of patterns and mediums just to bring in and intensify this particular swirl. Make it something, a little bit interesting. At a later date, I'll actually do a class on mark making and how energy can be trapped within art. But for today's purposes, really we just want to build up this nice swirl. Now I'm going to bring some white paint in, just as a censoring tool or just as an eraser, if you will, just to clean up these areas and just to make some certain things obvious. Okay, now that drip happened to be exactly where I wanted it to be, just one of those happy accidents that happens in art sometimes. You'll also notice that when I'm using my paintbrush, I don't know if you know much about paintbrushing techniques, but instead of holding it right at the tip, I'm actually taking it really far back, and so I can preserve as many of the motions of that paintbrush as I possibly can. Now, of course, I could take this white paint right out to the edge of the canvas if I wanted to, just to censor the whole thing out. However, this is just an example. So what I'm going to do is take a scrap piece of paper, just stencil off one of those edges, and use that to create an Ouroboros or our Zen swirl, which just to show you that you can actually take this concept, this very simple concept, and turn some really decent art out with it if you'd like to. Now, just in closing, I just want to remind you all of this example of your brain being like the beach, and the waves coming in and crashing on that beach are like your thoughts coming in from the outside world or coming in from the subconscious. It's a really, really simple way of thinking about your mind. However, if you take it into artistic practice and are willing to take the time to breathe through your artwork, 2 to 3 breaths in between doing major actions, you'll actually find that your choices, your decision-making ability is much increased by just utilizing your breath through this process. I also understand that sometimes this nervous energy, this buzzing energy that we all have in our brains can be quite a negative thing, but the best trick is not to learn to ignore it or put it to the side. The best thing is to actually adopt some Zen practices or Buddhist practices or Eastern meditation practices to actually utilize some of this energy. Instead of trying to ignore it, we want to actually bring it into our artwork and actually make it something quite productive. I know sometimes it can feel like your brain is ganging up on you and that you're actually working against yourself. However, if you learn these practices, it'll take some of the fear out of that process and actually make it much, much more enjoyable. Of course, the more enjoyment, the more relaxation you get through your art, the better the art will be, and also too, the more other people will appreciate the art form. So I sincerely hope that this class has been somewhat enlightening or invigorating, or has taught you something today. Please remember to subscribe to this channel, as I'll be putting up more classes and generating more ways of getting ideas and holding ideas and utilizing your own brain. Of course, you can send me an email or get in touch with me through social media. I'm on Instagram. My artwork is completely free, so if you want some of my art, please just get in touch with me and you can have it. It's free to absolutely everybody, and I really hope that you can learn to get more comfortable with your own mind and bring that into your artistic practice, and learn to let go a little bit and just enjoy yourself. Namaste, YouTube. I hope this helps.